obviously there's this huge discussion about Scottie Barnes and can he run point, all that kind of stuff. Very important for any point guard to run a lot of pick and roll. And I'll just start with you here. So you wrote in your piece, I tracked 514 pick and roll possessions with Barnes on ball, and he created 114 advantages. First off, take us through how you actually would do a piece like this.
Yeah, because I just need people to know, like, if you thought this was as simple as firing up Scotty's synergy page and just
Yeah.
clicking pick and roll, no, that
Oh, this is an Azotam
synergy
behavior.
or
Yeah.
something like that only gives you the pick and roll designation if the play finishes via that pick and roll.
Right.
So I've got the number here at 127, maybe a little higher. It goes up to 258 if we include passes. So you found like double what was on synergy. So you went back and like through every game last season, just kind of the Scotty minutes and finding whatever you designated as a pick and roll play?
Basically, if you ran a pick and roll, you track that, and then an advantage created is kind of like, a lot of people watch DeMar DeRozan on these Raptors. If he made a 19-foot pull-up, you're like, I'm glad we got that bucket, but that's not good process for offense. Good process for offense is creating like a makeable shot for a teammate, an easy shot for a teammate, or putting yourself in a really advantageous position to score on your own. And a lot of this, for a lot of people, is like paint touches, but is when you incorporate playmaking and paint touches and you kind of look at the types of shots he's created and take into account the talent of who he's getting the ball to, you can kind of get into a place where you say, like, this is an advantage created on a certain possession. And so an advantage can come on a possession where they don't even score. And a non-advantage can come on a possession where they do score. But you're trying to find something that's replicable. And 19-foot shot making isn't that replicable, but paint touches and layups and corner three-point shots that you create for other guys are replicable because you keep making those things happen. So that's why I've always wanted to look at advantages created instead of just like points per possession. And yeah, you have to watch every possession, which is why instead of just doing pick and roll, I have the post-ups, the isolations, and the pick and roll.
And the advantages created idea is important because, again, not just because the data isn't all that high fidelity. If we just look at plays finished via the pick and roll, because an advantage created could mean, hey, then I made the pass. I created advantage. I made the pass to Will. Will didn't shoot it.
That'll be a first.
I didn't shoot it. So yeah, me creating an advantage. Yes, absolutely. You'd pick up an offensive foul, but let's play this out. So I don't get credit for that as a pick and roll because I passed it off. Yeah. Will, you are then making the next pass. That doesn't get credited because now we're a couple plays down the line. But Samson gets the ball swung to him, hits a three. All of that was possible because of that first advantage created. And Samson, before we get into some of the specifics with this, how much is that idea and that way of thinking about how an offensive possession progresses, kind of what new head coach Darko Rajakovic is getting at when he talks about 0.5 basketball?
I think, yeah, you're trying to mine advantages as much as possible on the floor, and you're trying to put your team in a really good position to succeed. And there are some players who are undeniable. They're superstars. They create like a big advantage, and then the defense responds. I think the best example is that how LeBron James, as a point forward, kind of broke basketball with the skip pass to the corner. The velocity of it, the point of, like, he had to put hardly any arc on it, and the fact that he was so dangerous as a scorer. And then teams started utilizing the weak side zone more so they could spy and kind of hawk on that pass. And teams started being more clever about weak side zones. And then so what you're doing is you're trying to find newer advantages. And Darko, the 0.5 basketball thing, which other coaches have talked about, of course, is about taking a small advantage and through making a quick decision and making the right decision, you can create into a larger advantage. And these things will compound and expand upon once each other. So that's kind of like the idea behind 0.5 basketball.
Okay. I like this. This is really good basis in theory. Right now, with what we saw from Scottie last season, where are his limitations, where are his strengths when we're talking about him running pick and roll?
Sorry, before we get to set that question up, you mentioned off the top, Will, that in the quote from the piece, of those 514 pick and roll possessions, Scottie Barnes created an advantage 22% of the time. And Samson, you used the term only. This is obviously not something that we have readily available data for, and maybe someone doesn't even care about the actual numbers. But when we say, hey, a little less than a quarter of the time he was creating an advantage in a pick and roll, before we get into some of the limitations, in your estimation, that's probably not a good enough number to justify 500 pick and roll possession yet.
Yeah, you probably want, if a guy's going to be, because I think he was 39th in overall frequency for pick and roll. But if you want a guy running a ton of pick and rolls, you probably want to be at least above like 35% advantages created. And some of the best players, you're probably looking between like 45 and 55%. It's just really inherent that they get downhill, they have a pull-up threat available to them, they collapse the defense, they put the defense in like the cat and mouse game of the weak side zone, or they force the big man to step up, or they're creating that 2-on-1 possession in the pick and roll situation with the roller. And those types of things are so easy. But Scottie, what he had to navigate is the fact that a lot of his bigs don't shoot, and a lot of teams are either going under the screen, thus negating it, or just switching the screen, thus negating it, putting him into a lot of isolation situations, or putting him into situations where he just has to pass out and move the play along. So he has a lot of work to do, and the Raptors also have to provide a better context for pick and roll ball handlers in general.
Okay, so like tangibly right now, what can the team do under this current context in terms of the teammates? And also sort of for him long-term skill-wise, what are those jumps that need to be made so that he can create more of those advantages on his own, regardless of what the person knows around him?
I don't even think the shooting is the most important part to
Okay.
be dangerous. I think it's the handle, because DeMar DeRozan is a really easy comp for, you see a guy who utilizes his handle to re-screen guys lower in the court. And Scottie doesn't have the shiftiness or the handle to comfortably move a guy, position him. You know, like that's the whole point of using your handle, is positioning a player so that you can come off the screen clean and they get caught. Scottie lets guys get into him. He has a tough time creating space, and so he doesn't have as easy a time getting to re-screens in snug pick and rolls. And you could look at a guy like Pascal even, who if they switch it, he's so comfortable as a scorer, he can go into isolation and score. And though, so you're scoring derived out of the pick and roll, but in an isolation, or you can go back into a snug pick and roll where you kind of shrink the floor, and then you can still create that 2-on-1 situation. So I think the handle for Scottie is the most important, but he's working on everything, right? Like we saw in the preseason games, like it's catch high, keep high for his 3-point stuff. The dip isn't as low. It's a quicker release, at least in the catch and shoot stuff. Like he's working on everything. It's just the handle and the shot need to be much better to be a vaunted pick and roll creator.
So, in addition to going through all of these plays yourself, and these, to be clear, are rewatches and probably a lot of times your third watch of a game or a certain possession or whatever. You also talk to scouts around the league for this piece, and to be a little reductive, one scout said to you, "Well, you just switch or you go under," and either one is fine. And I think when we hear that a team is willing to go under on a pick and roll, like you kind of parried there. Well, add a mid-range pull-up jumper is how you compete with that. Now, that willingness for a defense to switch, obviously the handle is going to be a part of that, just in terms of who you can break down and how you can rescreen. But what can he do to make the switching of the pick and roll a little more difficult for a defense?
If you engage a switch really quickly, the defense doesn't have time to load up as often. Like the team defense, teams switch at the point of attack, but it comes a little later from a team concept. Like everybody, you switch, and then since we've had so much like heliocentric offense, a lot of people, you take that breath, you settle, and then the defense loads up because the guy's like dribbling back out, he's sizing up. But if Scottie just attacks a little bit quicker, turning the corner, put a shoulder into a guy, and then kind of like, use the escape dribble to assess, there's going to be more opportunities for cuts, particularly from the 45, something that Chris Boucher and Precious are really great at. And there's going to be opportunities to kind of put the defense on the back foot a little bit more often.
Can you explain what you mean by cut from the 45 for someone who doesn't know that terminology?
So basically the 45 is like the 45 degrees. So just imagine the corner of the paint, like the top corner, just extend that out to the sideline and making a cut from a 45-degree angle towards the basket.
I wasn't very good at geometry.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, we had a discussion yesterday about Pythagorean wins. I believe this directly ties to that.
Pythagoras didn't know ball. That's the part that's missing there.
Maybe not. So I think one thing that was also really interesting here in terms of thinking about Scottie's pick and roll is obviously there's a partner that you have to screen, and a large part of sort of your effectiveness is sort of what they do. And you broke down the numbers here in terms of what it looks like when he runs it with Christian, with Pascal, with Fred from last year. Obviously he's gone, and then Jakob Poeltl. Well, let's start with, I guess, the more concerning part, maybe work our way to the more promising part. But it didn't seem like he had that much. The points per chance with Jakob Poeltl when Scottie ran it was 0.675. What did you see from the film?
And that's his second most common pick and roll partner too. So, familiarity, if you were going to use the term chemistry there, maybe explain some of it initially, but that's a pretty, with what we're talking about, it's one of the largest samples there.
Yeah, when we can look at Pascal's numbers. He and Pascal ran really efficient pick and rolls, but a lot of it wasn't what you think a pick and roll looks like. It's that they ran a pick and roll, Pascal got Scotty's defender on him and then scored out of it. And Pascal's a really great scorer. What happens with Jakob is they get that same switch, and neither Scottie nor Jakob are gifted enough scorers to make teams pay.
Okay.
So the switching aspect of it is really difficult. And the reason why that's different with Christian is a little bit more of a vertical threat. Anybody who's watched Scottie knows he likes to kind of push the envelope with guys with these massive catch radiuses that they can go up and get it. He can hit Koloko, and especially since Scottie, like, utilizing a high pickup and these higher release points as a passer, there's like a more natural connection there. But also, they ran more drag screens in transition. They ran more step-up screens between Koloko. Like, Jakob, in a lot of his possessions, just because, again, Nick Nurse liked to use Jakob in the high post the same way that Darko did, you use these double drags to initiate these, like, Chicago actions and initiate these situations where you're running the ball through Jakob in the high post. But when you bring two screeners into it, you're just bringing more clunk to where Scottie is. And he's not going to shoot over it or turn the corner, really. So you're just kind of like creating this really gluttonous, gross mass at the top of the arc. Yeah. And so I don't think they utilized the Jakob Scottie pick and roll as best they could, but I also don't think there's a lot of inherent advantages there either.
So with respect to Christian being his most effective, or Pascal the most effective, but Christian the most effective, where we think of a more traditional pick and roll, we haven't seen Christian Koloko in camp yet. We don't know, and we're probably not going to know what the status of that is until he's closer to a return. But what can we learn from that in terms of how to continue to better use Scottie Barnes in these situations? And I think of, whether Chris Boucher has generally been much more of a pick and pop kind of screener than a pick and roll kind of screener, but he's another guy who has that vertical element that we've seen Scottie try to pick out a couple times in the preseason here. I wonder too how much of what you saw was just the quality of screen and the physicality of it that Christian Koloko sets versus some of these other guys who are more conditioned, I think, to slip or pop early, whereas Christian Koloko, maybe just the youngness to him, maybe just the 905 hammering it in, but was a much more physical screener before taking off toward the rim.
Yeah, like, it's a huge difference. A lot of people remember, like, Houston versus Golden State, when you would see all they're doing is guys are walking up to the action, screening. It wasn't really screening. They're just walking and initiating the switch, and then Klay Thompson has to guard James Harden or something, or Steph has to guard, James Harden. And the Raptors, despite not having the same scoring talent, a lot of their screening kind of emulated that. It's like Thad Young, like, walks up there, he kind of rocks up, like, hey, we're trying to initiate a switch. And then Scottie's like, great, I have basically the same defender on me, and we did this. Whereas Christian is like, I'm going to plant this thing, man. Let's go do something about it.
Okay.
And maybe it's like that younger man gusto or whatever. And Pascal didn't really care to put down good screens either. But that's because Pascal was like, get me the switch. I'm going to go get us a bucket. And then Fred is also not planting that many screens because he's running ghost screens.
Yeah. It is almost Halloween.
Yeah, spooky.
Yeah.
Real spooky.
Gonna go as a ghost screen, Blake?
I last year around Halloween, I don't know if it's in this notebook or if it's in a different notebook, but I drew a ghost screen. I drew the play up on like a whiteboard, and it was just ghosts running pick and roll.
You sent that to me. I remember that. Yeah.
I was in Cuba at the time.
Yeah.
It was like my little window between Blue Jays and Raptors. But,
yeah, they gave you 2 days or whatever.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about that element of it. So you mentioned Fred as well, not being someone who plants the screen because they're going to do more of that, ghost screen action instead. And the idea being, again, to either generate a switch or ideally, that's Fred popping open for a quick pick and pop three. What is the Raptors' capacity going to be to run big, small pick and roll this year without a guy like Fred, without a guy like Kyle Lowry? Because it's not only been an effective play for them going back to Pascal Fred, going back to DeMar Kyle, but it's also been just like a really effective crunch time option for them. Obviously, they don't have Kyle, they don't have Fred. Dennis Schroeder's in there. What is the capacity going to be? And I'm thinking specifically with the ball in Scottie's hands to run some big, small pick and roll.
They ran 23. I know I didn't put it in the piece, but they ran 23 with Gary and Scottie, and they finished at a point per possession, which is, it's not great. It's not fantastic. It's not bad either. And I think that partnership in particular has a lot of potential to grow into something meaningful. I think that's probably what you can expect to see between Scottie and Pascal. And I do think in crunch time, you're going to see a lot of Scottie Pascal stuff as well. But with Dennis, during the largest part of the game and during some of these like ho-hum games, I think there's going to be a lot there because when teams are catching up to the ghost screen, usually they're doing it in the form of a closeout because like the ghost screener, you're like shuffling your feet and then you're bursting out of the action into space and the pass is coming. We even saw one in the collection of film I put out there that you can see Wancho did it for Scottie last year. And Scottie puts the pass right on the mark. He's really talented in that way. But Dennis, if the teams work to close out on him, he's going to get into the paint. He's going to create a paint touch out of that. But if teams are kind of like cutting into the paint to wall it off and not really respecting the shot, I think that they're probably not going to be able to create a lot. They might have to go back to like a pitch play between Dennis and Scottie, where it's a lot easier at the point of attack now because Dennis's defender went so low. Like that's kind of the whole idea of the rescreen.
You get the head of steam kind of already before the guy's back in position to switch around.
Yeah, that's exactly it. There's always stuff they can counter to. But as far as the inherent initial advantage, I don't think they'll be able to emulate anything close to what they did last year with that play.